It was a cold, rainy evening in New York City, the kind of night where the streets are slick with rain, and the city feels both alive and dead at the same time. I had just finished a late shift at work, exhausted but looking forward to getting home. The subway was my usual way of getting around, and I had never felt uneasy about it before. But that night, something was different. As I descended into the dimly lit subway station, I noticed that it was unusually empty. The only sound was the distant rumbling of a train approaching. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 11:43 p.m. The last train of the night was about to arrive, and I was the only one on the platform. Also, I thought. The train screeched to a halt, and the doors slid open with a hiss. I stepped inside and found a seat near the back of the car. It wasn't until the train started moving that I noticed him, a man sitting at the other end of the car, staring directly at me. His eyes were cold, almost lifeless, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I tried to ignore him, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But as the train sped through the tunnels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man's gaze never wavered, and I could feel his eyes boring into me, even when I looked away. A few stops later, the man stood up and began walking toward me. My heart raced as I watched him close the distance between us. He took a seat directly across from me, his eyes locked onto mine. There was something off about him. His clothes were disheveled, and his face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. "Long night?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I nodded, not wanting to engage in conversation, but he didn't seem to care. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of alcohol and something foul. "You're all alone, aren't you?" he whispered. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was indeed alone on this train, with no one to help me if things went south. I needed to get out of there, but the next stop was still several minutes away. I tried to stay calm, planning my escape. I would get off at the next station and find a way to lose him in the crowd. But as the train pulled into the station, the man suddenly stood up, blocking my path. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. "Where do you think you're going?" he sneered, his tone dripping with malice. Without thinking, I shoved past him and bolted out of the train. I could hear his footsteps behind me as I sprinted through the empty station, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned a corner, hoping to find an exit, but instead, I found myself in a dead-end corridor. Trapped, I turned to face him, my back against the cold, tiled wall. The man approached slowly, a twisted smile on his face. He pulled something out of his coat, a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. "This is going to be fun," he hissed, taking a step closer. I was paralyzed with fear, but I knew I had to do something. I scanned the corridor for anything I could use as a weapon, my eyes landing on a rusty metal pipe lying on the ground. I grabbed it and swung with all my strength, catching him off guard. The man staggered back, clutching his side where the pipe had struck him. I didn't wait to see how badly he was hurt. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. I could hear him behind me, cursing and yelling as he gave chase. The station was a labyrinth of tunnels and staircases, and I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to keep running. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were about to give out, but the adrenaline kept me going. Finally, I spotted an exit sign and sprinted toward it with everything I had left. I burst through the doors and into the night, gasping for air. The rain was still pouring, but I didn't care. I was out of that station, away from that maniac. I kept running until I reached a busy street, where I finally felt safe enough to stop. I looked back, half expecting to see him coming after me, but he was nowhere in sight. I was safe, or so I thought. The following days were a blur. I went to the police, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. Without any solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the memory of that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice. I started seeing him everywhere, in the reflection of store windows, in the shadows of alleyways, in the faces of strangers on the street. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear was real. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on with my life. But then, one night, as I was heading home from work, I saw him. He was standing on the other side of the street, watching me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, there was no doubt it was him. I turned and ran, but I could feel his eyes on me, feel his presence getting closer. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me and locking every lock. But the nightmare was far from over. Over the next few days, I started receiving strange messages, notes slipped under my door, phone calls with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. He was playing with me, toying with my fear. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living in fear, couldn't let him control my life. So I decided to confront him. I set a trap, luring him to a deserted part of the city where I knew I would have the upper hand. The night came, and I waited in the shadows, the same metal pipe in my hand. He showed up, just as I knew he would, a twisted grin on his face. But this time, I was ready. We fought, and it was brutal. But I was fighting for my life, for my sanity, and in the end, I won. I left him there, bleeding and unconscious, and I walked away, knowing that I would never see him again. That night changed me forever. It made me realize just how fragile our sense of safety really is, how quickly it can be shattered by someone with ill intentions. I survived, but the scars remain, both physical and mental. I hope my story serves as a reminder to always be aware of your surroundings and to never let your guard down, even for a moment. Thank you for listening, and if you want to hear more real-life horror stories, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Horror. Until next time, stay safe.